Welcome to a new season of Sane and Simple Podcasting, where I help you manage and promote your podcast so you can get on to actually benefiting from the connections that you're making and not just spending too much time creating your content. I did a series of vertical lives recently on YouTube, which is a lot of fun to do, and I wanted to put some of those over here on the podcast as well. What you're going to get in this season are different tips for workflow, ChatGPT for your marketing, podcast editing, promotions, and YouTube for podcasting tips. What I'd love you to do is, if you like this, feel free to share it with one person. Sane and Simple Podcasting. It's not just a name, it's a mindset. Let's keep this simple and jump into today's tip right now. I have a confession. I skip podcast trailers a lot of the time. There's a reason why, and your listeners might feel the same way. Hi, I'm Steph from Sane and Simple Podcasting, and this podcast is here to help you very calmly and enjoyably create your content so you can spend more time with the connections that you make and the people that you meet than in being a perfectionist with your podcast. And today, as you may have guessed, I'm talking about podcast trailers. I'm talking about them because they are really important, which may be confusing considering what I just confessed. When I say I skip trailers often, I don't mean all the time, but I do mean in some places. Let me explain. I am one of those weird people that searches for podcasts on their podcast app. Now, most people, the studies indicate, learn about podcasts from word of mouth, from maybe social media, and from YouTube is a big discoverability place, apparently. And I learned from them in those places, but that's not where I see the most trailers most of the time. When I search by keyword on my podcast app, I don't want an overview of the podcast. I can see that in the text that I read to know if I want to listen to that podcast. I want to dive right in. And listening to a trailer with general information is the opposite of what I want from the podcast at that moment. For example, when I was looking for EMDR podcasts to help me understand the therapy I was going through and the research behind it and the history behind it and all that kind of stuff, the last thing I wanted was an overview of the episodes or of the podcast. I wanted the details. I wanted the meat, not the appetizer. But So in that platform on my podcast app, I very rarely listen to trailers. There's one exception still. If it's an audio drama, and even if I read this description and I sound like I'm interested, I still want to hear the voices before I commit. So I'll probably listen to the trailer to get a sense of the voices that are going to be in the story. And in that case, I will listen to it, especially because every detail and getting acclimated to the voices is important before diving into the story. That is the one exception. But generally speaking, I skip over trailers when I find a podcast in my podcast app. How can I think that podcast trailers are important if I skip them? I skip them in that one location. I generally don't skip them on social media. I don't skip them on websites. I don't skip them anywhere online that I see them. Even on YouTube, I generally will watch a trailer because they're short. Do I watch the entire thing? That depends on the trailer, my friend. But I generally will watch trailers if they come into my feed in those places, more than I will episode clips or audiograms. Absolutely. Why? Why is there a difference between my podcast app and the other online platforms? But like I said, when I search on my podcast app, I want to go straight to the content. I want the details. But when I'm just stumbling across a podcast trailer in any other location, I am game for general stuff. I want that little appetizer to nibble on while I think about if I want to leave that platform and go search for you in my podcast app so I can add you so I can be reminded when you have a new episode out. So there's a really big difference. You're going to have to woo me online before I go to my podcast app to add you. But if I'm on my podcast app, I don't need to be wooed. I need to dive in and get value. So those are the two biggest differences for me for podcast trailers. I have a feeling that your listeners might have some similar characteristics, even if they don't search for podcasts on their podcast app, because that is a lesser admitted to task, apparently. But even if they don't do that, I'm thinking on those online platforms, they are much more likely to welcome your podcast trailer than if they find you in a podcast app. I don't know. It's a hunch. It's a hunch based on this N of one right here, me. And if that's true, then just having your podcast trailer on your podcast feed isn't enough. It feels like you should be sharing your podcast trailer in many places, often, not just when you make it once. Now, I just stopped to make a note because I just made a new trailer last week, and I did not actually put it into my workflow to repurpose that I'd say once a month feels like a good time to repurpose it onto the socials in different locations. Maybe even more often than that, depending on the momentum you get from that and if you want to try to speed it up. Repurposing your podcast trailer is almost more important than making your podcast trailer. So if you have one on your RSS feed, you're a step ahead. You can just take the audio file that you already have and start doing things with it. You can put it on different places in social media. You can experiment with the video that you want to go with it. It can be a nature scene from around where you live. It can be images of your pet. It can be you just, going about your day. It doesn't have to be you saying the things in the trailer. Absolutely not. And of course, it can just be a static image. Whatever you want to do with it. It should be something catchy and relatable. But beyond that, what matters is that you keep sharing your trailer so that people can keep discovering your podcast in the different places that you do it. Don't forget to tag people. Don't forget to use hashtags. Do the things on the platforms that people do so that others can discover your podcast. The thing that reignited my interest in podcast trailers recently is James Cridlin from Pod News. He has a new podcast called New Podcasts, which is 100% trailers. And you can submit your podcast there. When I actually added my new Sane and Simple podcasting trailer over there, I did get a nice bump, and I did share that in the YouTube video with folks. I can't promise a similar bump, or a certain time frame, or that your trailer will be accepted into the podcast, yada, yada, yada. I'm not involved in the project. I just know as a listener, I am really enjoying having one central place where I can audio discover many different podcasts. I've already added about 3 or 4 into my podcast app. I use Podcast Addict. I've already added about 3 or 4, and I'm really excited about them because I already heard the voices. I already got the information, and the folks that submitted, they're on point. I'm hearing very clear, understandable, well-produced podcast trailers. So if you don't have a podcast trailer yet, I even suggest going over to New Podcast and listen to a bunch of trailers. Make some notes on things you like that people are doing in their trailers and make your outline from there. And then record your trailer. Because listening to well-created trailers is a really good way to create your own trailer. So again, I really want to say that where people encounter your trailer, where they discover it, where they stumble across it, could really impact how they approach your trailer, if they listen to the trailer, how much of the trailer they listen to, and so forth and so on. So I want you to really think about making your trailer, if you already have one, submitting it to New Podcasts, and if you've done all of that, recirculating your trailer on a regular basis. Maybe with different video, if you're going to put it up on social media, or different images. Switch it around. Have it be relevant and relatable. Just keep circulating it. I don't think people can see your trailer too much. I mean, have you seen what some of the bigger podcasts do and how much of the same content they keep circulating again and again and again? It's not an accident that they've gained a big audience. It's not the only reason that happens, but that doesn't hurt. More discoverability is more discoverability, and there's rarely too much discoverability out there for podcasts, especially if you're audio only. Go and listen to the Sane and Simple podcasting trailer. It's the first one here. Also, if you want to join us for the live where I do the practical aspect of what we're talking about that week, it's on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Copenhagen time. And Don't worry, I don't expect you to do the math. You can go to timeanddate.com, go to their meeting planner, and you can figure out what time that is wherever you are in the world. I hope you join me on YouTube for the practical side on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Copenhagen time, Copenhagen, Denmark. And then the newsletter comes out shortly thereafter. And then the podcast version comes out later. And they all have slightly different aspects of the same topic. Thanks so much. This is Steph from Sane and Simple Podcasting. And I just want to say, I'm so glad you're podcasting. See you next week.